They built bodies of gods, believing they were invincible. They were wrong. Today, we document the final, ironic, fatal moments of 6 legendary bodybuilders. This is not a story of their triumphs. It is an autopsy of their final failure. Do not replicate the actions or lifestyles shown. On January 17, 2015, the Burbank air was clear and cool. The steel rails of the Metrolink track cut a straight, unwavering line through the urban landscape, gleaming under the California sun. This was the chosen stage for Greg Plitt. He was more than a bodybuilder. He was a living embodiment of human potential, a graduate of West Point, a former Army Ranger, and a global fitness icon. His entire brand was built on a single, powerful idea: that with enough discipline, a person could conquer any obstacle. His life was a continuous performance of invincibility. For a promotional video, he had designed a stunt that was the ultimate expression of his philosophy. The concept was simple and profoundly arrogant. He would run on the railroad tracks, outpacing an oncoming train, and leap aside at the last possible moment. It was a real-life superhero moment, designed to prove he was, quite literally, more powerful than a locomotive. The norm for Greg was a world of calculated risks where his superior physical and mental conditioning always gave him the edge. The safety betrayal was his own confidence. He believed his elite training made him an exception to the simple, brutal rules that govern the rest of the world. The latent variable was Metrolink Train 264, a 450,000-pound machine designed for speed and efficiency. It moved at over 50 miles per hour, and unlike a loud, clattering freight train, it ran relatively quietly on welded rails. It was a silent predator. Greg and his 2-person crew were in a restricted zone, a fact he likely saw as an irrelevant technicality. As the train appeared in the distance, a small dot on the horizon, the performance began. The train's horn blasted a warning, a long, piercing sound designed to clear the tracks. For anyone else, this was a signal of imminent danger. For Greg, it was his cue. This was the bifurcation point, the final off-ramp to safety, a warning he consciously chose to ignore. He began to run between the rails, his back to the train, then turned to face it, a defiant stance against the approaching steel beast. He was operating on a series of fatal miscalculations. The first was a simple trick of the eye called foreshortening. An object moving directly toward you appears to be moving much slower than it is, because it's not crossing your field of vision. The train was closing the distance far faster than his brain could perceive. The second error was an overestimation of his own abilities. An Army Ranger is trained to react in milliseconds to human threats. But a train is not a human. It is a massive, unthinking object with immense kinetic energy, an object that cannot stop, cannot swerve, and cannot be intimidated. The ground began to hum, then vibrate. The sound of the horn grew from a warning to a deafening physical force. The final seconds were a slow-motion nightmare. The camera, rolling just feet away, captured the moment his supreme confidence shattered into dawning horror. This was the micro-hope fake-out, a last-second instinctual lurch to get off the tracks. Witnesses saw him stumble as he finally realized his fatal error in timing. But it was far too late. A train moving at that speed covers the length of a football field in about 4 seconds. His reaction was a millisecond against an avalanche. The convergence was absolute and instantaneous. The forensic zoom is a stark lesson in physics. The front of the train struck him. The sheer force of the impact resulted in immediate, catastrophic, and non-survivable injuries. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. The train's engineer had slammed on the emergency brakes, but a machine of that weight takes more than 1/4 of a mile to stop. The final, frozen frame is one of chilling silence. The massive train standing still far down the tracks, its purpose fulfilled, and the 2 stunned crew members standing over their fallen camera. The most haunting artifact recovered was the footage from that camera. It contained the final moments of a man who spent his life proving he was invincible, only to be undone by a force that didn't even know he was there. His last performance was a perfect, tragic testament to the fact that no matter how strong your will, you cannot outrun the laws of physics. On January 16, 1993, the air in Gym 80 in Reykjavik was raw. It smelled of cold iron, sweat, and the fine, white dust of chalk. Outside, the Icelandic winter was a gray, frozen stillness. But inside this Spartan temple of strength, Jan Paul Sigmarsson was a human volcano. He wasn't just a four-time world's strongest man, he was a force of nature, a modern Viking who treated every lift as a glorious battle. His fame was built on more than just lifting stones and pulling trucks. It was built on his explosive persona, his roars of, "I am a Viking," and his absolute, unwavering life philosophy. He had once famously declared, "There is no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." For Jan Paul, this was not a clever slogan. It was a fact. It was the core of his identity. The deadlift was his sermon, his proof of existence. On this day, he was not performing for a crowd or a television crew. He was performing for himself, reaffirming his own creed in the quiet solitude of his gym. The norm for a strongman is to live on the edge of physical failure, to generate forces that would tear a normal body apart. For Jan Paul, this extreme state was his baseline, but a latent variable was buried deep in his genetic code, a silent flaw passed down through his family line. He had a known congenital weakness in the wall of his aorta. The aorta is the body's master pipeline, the massive artery that carries high-pressure blood from the heart to the rest of the body. Think of it as a fire hose built to withstand immense force, but his had a weak spot, a section of tissue that was not as resilient as the rest. It was a time bomb waiting for the right trigger. That trigger was the deadlift. The deadlift is uniquely dangerous for this condition because it requires a maneuver that jacks up internal pressure to unbelievable levels. To lift maximum weight, you take a huge breath, hold it, and bear down with every muscle in your core. This creates a rigid torso, allowing you to lift immense loads, but it also causes a massive, instantaneous spike in blood pressure. It's like putting a clamp on that fire hose and turning the pressure all the way up. The convergence point was the heavily loaded barbell on the floor. It was not just iron, it was an altar. He approached it, his huge hands wrapping around the cold, knurled steel. He inhaled, a massive intake of air that strained the fabric of his shirt. He was now a sealed pressure vessel. He began to pull. The plates rattled, the thick steel bar began to bend under the strain, and every muscle in his 130-kilogram frame contracted in a single, violent symphony of force. For a fraction of a second, he was Jan Paul Sigmarsson at the peak of his power, living his truth. And it was in that exact moment of maximum pressure that the subjective world of his will collided with the objective, fragile reality of his biology. The pressure inside his aorta exceeded the structural integrity of the weakened vessel wall. The forensic zoom of the event is mechanical and absolute. A catastrophic tear occurred in the aorta. The body's main high-pressure pipeline had burst. This caused blood pressure to drop to zero almost instantly. The brain, starved of blood and oxygen, shut down in less than a second. There was no time for a final roar, no moment of pain or realization. It was a sudden, complete system failure. The official cause of death was a fatal cardiovascular event. The only sound was the thunderous crash of the barbell and weights hitting the floor as his body collapsed beside it. Then, nothing. The final, frozen frame is the utter silence of the gym. A cloud of chalk dust, disturbed by the fall, hung in the air like a ghost. The ultimate artifact is the barbell itself, now lying silent on the platform. He had lived his life by a simple, brutal creed, a statement that linked his very existence to a single act of strength. In the end, his body made his words a literal truth, a tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy written in iron. On the night of August 22nd, the quiet of Dallas McCarver's Florida home was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. It was a sound of constant work, the sound of a machine preserving the massive amounts of fuel required to run an even bigger machine, Dallas himself. At just 26, he was not a man, but a phenomenon. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing more than 300 pounds, he was a walking mountain of muscle, hailed as the heir to the throne of professional bodybuilding. His entire existence was a performance of sheer size and power. His dangerous stunt wasn't a single trick. It was the relentless 24/7 project of creating and maintaining a body that bordered on inhuman. This project was fueled by an endless cycle of consumption. For Dallas, eating was not a pleasure. It was a job. It was a repetitive, joyless chore of forcing down thousands of calories, meal after meal, day after day, to feed the insatiable furnace of his metabolism. The scene was utterly normal. He had just finished a phone call with his girlfriend, telling her he was about to make his last meal of the day. The safety betrayal in his story is the most absolute of all. The deep, unspoken trust we have in the simple act of eating. It's a biological function so automatic, so fundamental, that we never consider it a threat. The latent variable was not a secret illness or a hidden defect. It was a single piece of food, waiting on his plate. The convergence of his life's path with this mundane threat was silent, instantaneous, and total. He took a bite. He swallowed. And in that 1-second action, the entire architecture of his life collapsed. The piece of food, likely consumed quickly as part of his rigid eating schedule, missed the esophagus and lodged perfectly in his trachea. It formed a complete, airtight seal. This is the moment where time distorts. For Dallas, the first sensation would have been utter confusion. Here was a man who could command his body to lift half a ton, a man whose will could dominate hundreds of pounds of iron. Yet he was suddenly powerless to perform the most basic act of survival, drawing a breath. His body's first response was the micro-hope fake-out, a violent, instinctual attempt to clear the airway. He would have tried to cough, a massive, convulsive effort powered by the lungs of a world-class athlete. But the blockage was a perfect plug. No air could get past it. His immense physical strength, the very thing that defined him, was now a liability. It was a massive engine trapped in a sealed room, consuming the last bits of oxygen at a furious rate. He couldn't lift his way out of this. He couldn't fight it. The enemy wasn't a weight he could drop. It was a simple mechanical failure inside his own throat. The forensic zoom of this event is a terrifying lesson in basic biology. The medical term is acute airway obstruction. When the airway is completely blocked, the supply of oxygen to the brain is cut off. Panic gives way to dizziness and loss of consciousness in less than a minute. Brain cells begin to die within 3 to 4 minutes. The autopsy would later reveal another critical factor. Dallas suffered from severe cardiomegaly, an enlarged heart, along with a heavy liver and kidneys. These were the hidden costs of his profession, organs strained to their limits by the demands of his extreme size and lifestyle. When the violent struggle for air began, his already overworked heart was pushed past its breaking point. It was a systemic collapse, triggered by a single, tiny error. He was found by a friend, unconscious on his kitchen floor. It was too late. The official cause of death was choking. The most tragic artifact of this story is the scene itself. The partially eaten meal left on the counter, a silent testament to the moment his relentless fueling schedule became a fatal trap. Dallas McCarver's story is the ultimate irony of strength. It proves that the most powerful body on the planet is still governed by the same fragile biological systems as everyone else. It is a chilling reminder that death doesn't always arrive in a storm of violence or disease. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the middle of the most ordinary moment of your life. The Sardinian sun beat down on the shoulders of a 78-year-old legend. Franco Columbu was not just a man. He was a living myth, a monument to the power of human will. His entire life had been a public performance of impossible strength. He bent steel bars with his hands. He deadlifted over 750 pounds. He could blow up a rubber hot water bottle with the force of his lungs alone, a feat of pressure that defied belief. For decades, he stood beside his best friend, Arnold Schwarzenegger, as proof that a human being could sculpt themselves into something more than mere flesh and bone. He was a two-time Mr. Olympia, a champion who had built an empire of muscle and an aura of complete invincibility. On this perfect summer day, he was on a boat off the coast of San Teodoro, his homeland. The setting was peaceful, the opposite of the screaming crowds and clanging weights that defined his career. He was there to enjoy a simple swim in the sea, an act of leisure. But for a man like Franco, even leisure was a reflection of his power. He was still strong, still vital. The system seemed perfect. The norm was that Franco Columbu was stronger than nature itself. But a latent variable was hidden inside his chest, a biological clock that was about to run out. The trigger was simple, almost trivial. He dove from the boat into the cool, clear water of the Mediterranean. For any person, especially someone of his age, the sudden shock of cold water on a hot day is a jolt to the system. It causes an involuntary reaction called vasoconstriction, where the blood vessels instantly tighten. This forces the heart to work much harder to pump blood through the narrowed pathways. For a normal heart, it's a brief strain. For a heart that had endured decades of extreme exertion and the physiological stresses of professional bodybuilding, this sudden, intense demand was a catastrophic overload. In that split second, the performance of a lifetime met its final, unscripted moment. A massive cardiac event began. There was no warning. One moment he was a powerful swimmer. The next, he was a passenger inside a failing machine. The first sensation was likely a crushing, invisible weight on his chest, a force far greater than any barbell he had ever lifted. His brain, conditioned by a lifetime of fighting through pain, would have screamed at his body to respond. Swim, kick, fight your way back to the surface. This was the micro-hope fake-out, the final, desperate command from the mind of a champion. But his body no longer obeyed. His legendary biceps, the arms that had won him trophies and global fame, were now just powerless tissue, starved of oxygen. The powerful legs that stabilized his record-breaking lifts could not kick. The entire empire he had built was being dismantled from within by a tiny biological error in his own heart's electrical rhythm. The forensic zoom of the event is a brutal lesson in human frailty. While his mind was still fighting, his body began to shut down. Unconsciousness would have come quickly. He slipped beneath the surface of the calm, beautiful water. The sea did not attack him. It was indifferent. It simply followed the laws of physics, offering no support to an unresponsive body. The scene on the boat exploded into chaos and disbelief. He was pulled from the water, his powerful frame now limp and unresponsive. The frantic efforts to revive him began, a desperate fight against an outcome that was already sealed. A rescue helicopter sliced through the quiet afternoon air, but it was a gesture of futility. Franco Columbu was gone. The official report was death by drowning, caused by a heart attack. It was a simple clinical end to a life built on defying simple realities. The final, haunting artifact is the image of his strength itself, now frozen in photographs and old films. It stands as a powerful reminder that no matter how much steel a man can bend or how much weight he can lift, he is still governed by the fragile, unseen mechanics of the human heart. His last fight was not against a rival or a record, but against his own biology, a battle that no one, not even a legend, can ever win. The recycled air on the March 1996 flight was cold, but a fire was ripping through Andreas Münzer's gut. Every slight shudder of the airplane sent a fresh wave of agony through him, a grinding metallic pain that felt like his insides were tearing apart. Just hours before, he stood on stage at the Arnold Classic in Ohio, a living sculpture celebrated under the hot glare of spotlights. The judges and cameras saw perfection. They saw the result of a dangerous performance he had mastered, the art of becoming the man with no skin. Now, at 30,000 feet, the applause was a distant memory, replaced by the drone of the engines and a brutal, internal reality. His entire life was a dangerous stunt. While other athletes performed backflips or lifted cars, Andreas's act was a silent, chemical war waged against his own biology. His goal was to achieve an image, a photograph, a moment on stage where every single muscle fiber and vein was visible, as if chiseled from stone. To do this, he had to erase every trace of fat and water from his body, a state nature does not allow. His method was a precise, daily cocktail of destruction. He used powerful anabolic steroids to keep his muscles from wasting away, while he consumed almost 0 calories. He injected insulin to force the few nutrients he ate directly into the muscle tissue. And most critically, he used massive doses of extreme diuretics, drugs designed to flush every last drop of water from his system. This is what created his famous paper-thin skin look. It also left him in a constant state of agonizing dehydration. His friends reported he would shiver uncontrollably from the cold, having no body fat for insulation, and suffer from crippling muscle cramps as his body screamed for water. This condition was his performance, and the stage was his finish line. But after the Ohio show, the finish line had been crossed, and the performance was over. His body, no longer fueled by the adrenaline of competition, began to send its final bill. Upon landing in Germany, the pain was unbearable. He was rushed to a hospital, where doctors faced a terrifying paradox. Before them was a man who looked like a Greek god, the picture of health and strength. But his blood work told a different story. His potassium levels were critically low. His blood was thick like oil from dehydration. The perfect man on the outside was a ticking time bomb on the inside. They rushed him into emergency surgery, hoping to stop what they believed was bleeding from stomach ulcers. It was a desperate gamble. For a moment, it seemed to work, but as soon as they stopped the bleeding in his stomach, his liver, which had been under chemical assault for years, began to hemorrhage uncontrollably. Then, his kidneys failed completely. The doctors were trying to plug leaks on a ship that was already at the bottom of the ocean. Andreas Münzer's system was in a state of total, irreversible shutdown. His heart, enlarged and overworked from years of pumping thickened blood, finally gave out. The autopsy report read less like a medical document and more like a horror story. The official cause of death was multiple organ failure, but the details were shocking. His liver was not a solid organ anymore. It had the consistency of wet sand and was filled with dozens of tumors. His heart weighed 636 grams, nearly double the size of a normal man's. His kidneys had failed, his pancreas was inflamed, and traces of around 20 different powerful drugs were found in his system. His body had 0 electrolytes, a condition seen only in victims who die of thirst in the desert. He had successfully performed his ultimate trick. He had stripped his body of everything that kept it alive. The photos of Andreas Münzer remain frozen moments of a physical state that should not be possible. They were once seen as inspiration. Now they are a warning. The blueprint for a perfect body and a perfect self-destruction. In March of 2013, the air in a Cairo hotel room was still, carrying the ancient hum of the city outside. Inside, a giant rested. Nasser El-Sonbati was a man of profound contradictions. On stage, he was a behemoth, a 300-pound mass monster who stood shoulder to shoulder with the largest men in the history of bodybuilding. Off stage, he was the professor, a university graduate who spoke 7 languages and wore wire-rimmed glasses, dissecting his sport with the cold precision of an academic. His entire life was a unique and dangerous performance. His stunt was not lifting a car or bending steel. It was the audacious intellectual gamble that he could outsmart his own biology. He believed his superior mind could navigate the treacherous chemical landscape of 1990s bodybuilding and emerge unscathed. He projected an aura of absolute control, a man who had calculated every risk and neutralized every threat. The norm during his competitive era was a brutal chemical arms race. To be a top contender, An athlete had to use a complex cocktail of drugs to push their body far beyond its natural limits. This was the price of admission. The latent variable in Nasser's experiment was the slow, invisible, and cumulative damage this process inflicted over years. Think of the body as a high-performance engine. Nasser was the brilliant mechanic who knew exactly how to mix the most explosive fuel, but that fuel burned dirty. Year after year, his kidneys, the engine's delicate filtration system, were forced to process a toxic sludge of chemicals they were never designed to handle. They became scarred and overworked, slowly losing their ability to clean his blood. Simultaneously, his heart, a pump designed for a 180-pound man, was forced to supply blood to a 300-pound frame. It strained, thickened, and grew pathologically large, becoming less a powerful engine and more a swollen, inefficient muscle. Nasser knew all of this. He spoke about the risks. But this was the core of his safety betrayal. He believed his intelligence was a shield. He thought he could manage the side effects, balance the equations, and step away from the experiment before the final, catastrophic failure. The convergence point was not a dramatic accident or a sudden collapse. It was the most ordinary act imaginable. He went to sleep. In sleep, the conscious mind is offline. The professor, the brilliant strategist, was no longer at the helm. The body was left to run on its own, automated and deeply damaged systems. For a healthy person, sleep is for recovery. For Nasser, it was the moment of reckoning. The time dilation of his final hours was a silent, internal cascade. As he slept, his kidneys, already functioning at a fraction of their capacity, finally crossed the threshold into complete failure. They stopped filtering his blood. This was the trigger for the final, fatal mechanism. The forensic zoom is a quiet lesson in biochemistry. With the kidneys offline, the level of potassium in his blood began to rise unchecked. Potassium is essential for life in normal amounts, but in high concentrations, it becomes a potent poison that directly attacks the heart. It disrupts the delicate electrical signals that tell the heart muscle when to contract. As the potassium level climbed through the night, it began to short-circuit his heart's rhythm. The steady, powerful beat of a giant became erratic, then weak, then fluttered into silence. This was not a violent, chest-clutching heart attack. It was a slow, chemical poisoning from within, a gentle and irreversible shutdown. He was found the next morning, having passed away in his sleep. The official cause of death was kidney and heart failure. The most chilling artifact he left behind are his old interviews, where he intelligently discusses the risks he was taking. They are now records of a brilliant man calmly and logically explaining the very process that would eventually kill him. His death was the final, brutal proof that no amount of intellect can renegotiate the terms of biology. You can be the smartest man in the room, but the human body doesn't listen to arguments. It only follows the rules. They all signed an unwritten contract. A few years of a godlike existence in exchange for decades of life they would never see. Now, the uncomfortable question for you. If you were guaranteed a world championship, fame, a legacy, but you knew with 100% certainty it would cost you 30 years of your life, would you sign that contract? Don't give me the safe moral answer. Give me the brutally honest one. Yes or no. Justify it below.